Erased, where the protagonist just gets beat up every episode. Censorship galore. Will this guy ever stop crying? A lot of negativity really worked against Tokyo Revengers as it was adapted in the spring and summer season of 2021. But even still, I think this show has a lot going for it that I really want to dive into. But this is my review of the 24-episode series, so let's jump right into it. Tokyo Revengers follows a guy named Takemichi, and he's an adult working a dead-end job. Doesn't really have much going for him, but at some point he wakes up to some news that a local gang, the Tokyo Manji Gang, has apparently had some violence in the city, and apparently somebody he knew from school unfortunately got involved with an accident and ended up dead. Jump forward to him taking a train, and unfortunately somebody decides to push him into the path of the train. And as he thinks that he's dead, he wakes up in his past, back when he was still in school, and actually the time in which he was going out with the person that had passed away, Hinata. And while confused, he kind of goes along with it, kind of reestablishing his memories of his friends and all the things they did and the run-ins they had with certain local gangs. Till one night he saves a boy from a couple of thugs, and it turns out this boy is actually the little brother of Hinata. And as he's talking to this boy, he eventually kind of just slips it out. You know, look, eventually something's going to happen to your sister, so please promise me that you're going to look after your sister and protect her. And as they kind of seal the deal by giving a little handshake, Zack's back to the future where he finds out that, yeah, he actually changed the future and his life was actually saved. But it doesn't end there. Unfortunately, the things that happen from the Tokyo Manji Gang continue to happen, and it's his duty to basically work alongside this brother, who they establish that whenever they shake hands, he actually transports back in time a certain period of time, which is exactly about 12 years. So over the course of the story, the two of them essentially work together in order to find out what sections of the Tokyo Manji Gang are kind of the issue involved, what is causing the gang to get to where it's being violent, and who are the people he possibly needs to save in order to assure a future where everybody's alive and happy. But of course, none of this is really easy because Takemichi's not really a strong kid. He's very whiny, he's very weak, he's timid, and he has to find this courage in himself to push forward and fight against people that are extremely dangerous. We're talking gangs here. These are people that kill people. These are people that harm other people. And his duty is to essentially fight back against this future that almost seems like an immovable object. And along the way, you're meeting a lot of people, including his friends that he'd known for a long time. Obviously, people that are a part of the Tokyo Manji Gang, or as they call it, Toman. The leader, Mikey, his second-in-command, Draken. These people that he kind of forms bonds with. And again, struggles with the idea of why this gang that seems like it's filled with people that are doing good things actually eventually end up being a very terrible group that will lead to these deaths that he wants to prevent. So my thoughts on Tokyo Revengers. Now let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. The version that we got in the West was absolutely horrific. There is absolutely zero excuses for the quality of what we produced in the West outside of Japan. This was a series that was horrifically censored. It was censored for an inappropriate reason. Essentially, for those that don't really get it, it's called the Tokyo Manji Gang. And so their symbol is Tokyo, the Manji symbol, gang. And the problem that comes from this is obviously Nazi Germany utilized the Manji symbol and turned it their own direction and perverted the symbol itself. The Manji symbol is actually a religious symbol that has been around for thousands of years, but unfortunately it was used improperly and skewed and changed, mind you, changed in order to be used in Nazi Germany. And unfortunately, they felt like this symbol was going to immediately be jumped on by people in the West, so they decided to censorship. But it's not just that. It was censorship that was terrible. We're talking about almost entire episodes where they're having gang meetings, and all we're seeing is the side of a building. We're hearing sound effects, we're hearing talking, but we don't see what's going on. It was an absolutely horrific censorship. And honestly, it affected my viewing experiences. I actually think this show was brought down significantly by that censorship. It was a terrible experience. I didn't know what was going on. I hated every minute of it, and that's what bugged me the most about it. Now, hopefully, eventually, when we get a Blu-ray release, I hope to all goodness that it is not censored. If that release is censored, I hope people yell about it, yell very loud about it, because it's simply something that could have been explained with a simple card at the beginning of the episode that explains what a Manji symbol is, because obviously we're not smart enough to understand that, or at least they don't think we are. Now that that's out of the way, let's put that over here. The rest of the show, I loved and hated certain parts of it. Now, everything to do with the story of the Manji Gang, the buildup of it, the characters, everything that involved that process, basically everything in the past that we go through in order to fix the future, was fantastic. I really did love this story. Granted, as much as I disliked Takemichi and his whiny attitude, getting a perspective of this immovable object that you're trying to change was very much so the reason why it was so intense and so enjoyable. Having these moments where, like, Hinata believes that this Mikey, who's the leader of the gang, is trying to do something against Takemichi, she stands up for him, and there's this deep-rooted fear of, wow, what is Mikey gonna do? Like, this is not something you can do, Hinata. What's going to happen to her? There's a fear there. And then as Takemichi has to step in, there's a fear there. Like, this is a bad group of people. And the way they portrayed a lot of those scenes was really fantastic. And even the points where you think that Takemichi is kind of engulfed himself into the gang and that he's the buddy of Mikey, there's still always a sense that Mikey, in order to preserve the structure that he has, would probably get rid of Takemichi. Like, there's never ever a sense that there's an impossibility for somebody to be removed for the sake of the group. And like I said, I think that attribute gives so much intensity to every single scene. A lot of these gang fights, a lot of situations in the past, this whole situation where some of the founding members of the Manja gang got involved with this incident that essentially changed everything. A lot of those stories were really great. I cannot express enough where I really do love these types of stories. Like, we don't really get gang stories much. And to get this kind of insight into this time period, almost like a period piece story, get a look into this kind of world, this culture, is definitely fascinating to me. It's technically the Yakuza story. It is the gang story, but set in Japan, that I think has its own unique style and its own structures and limitations and not limitations that I think are absolutely fantastic. Now, the issues that I have with the series is really around the time element. Now, granted, I'm fine with time elements. I actually loved Erased. I love a lot of these stories that deal with time. I kind of allow myself to suspend that disbelief with certain aspects to kind of help it move on. But with this particular one, I struggle with it a lot. And I think a lot of that has to do with the butterfly effect. This idea that you can change something in the past and it really doesn't have much of an effect in the future. Having Takemichi change his history so much, but what happens when he goes back in the future? He's at the same rental store. Why? Something would have changed. Something should have shifted, even a little bit, that wouldn't be your future still. But yet, it still kind of goes along with that. It kind of plays this idea that when Takemichi goes back to the future, it's like his mind and self kind of reverts back to its previous self and goes back the normal path. But you'd think those around him would still kind of see that as odd and pull him back into whatever thing he changed. Then, of course, there's Naoto and how the brother and how he's like connected to the whole thing and how he retains his memories. And that whole thing's a little weird as well. But again, suspension of disbelief kind of helps that a little bit. It doesn't bother me too much. But kind of distill this whole idea is, despite these issues, I still enjoy it because of all of this right here. The whole gang story and the stuff in the past is stuff that I really enjoy. And I still do like the element of the save the girl. I like that idea. Like, Hinata's fantastic. And the perspective that we get of her makes me just hurt for Takemichi. I want Takemichi to succeed because she's so awesome. Like, again, having this moment where she's so brave that she steps forward and protects him from Mikey just shows how good a person she is. And you want to save that. You want to protect the smile. But I will admit, my other issue I have is Takemichi is unbearable. He is the most whiny person. And I do like, at first I was kind of going with the whole Shinji aspect with him. Like, you know, he's going through some really crappy stuff. Like, he's not a strong person. He's really struggling here. He's pushing his strength. But unfortunately, for the most part, like every single encounter, you expect that moment where he gets that bravery and steps forward. But it always kind of amounts to him crying. And the crying makes people stop. And granted, it fits with the theme song of the whole thing. It's like this idea of the crybaby. But at some point, it's like, just do something. Like, don't amount everything to he cries and everybody goes, whoa, is that dude crying? And then they somehow shift something in the story. It's a little annoying. And finally, I guess I technically need to address the other elephant in the room, which is that this has a cliffhanger ending. This has a very terrible cliffhanger ending. This is an ending where it almost makes me want to say wait until a second season get announced unless you're willing to get into the manga, because it has a terrible cliffhanger. Now, granted, I can make assumptions on what happens. You know, you can assume that this is not going to happen. You can make at least two different ideas of what will end up happening based on that ending, but it's still a rough ending. It is a very rough ending to leave it on. And I think there is technically a lot of talk about this getting a continuation, so I don't think it's going to be bad, but it's still rough. But even still, like I said, I did really enjoy the series, and I think, like I said, a lot of that has to do with I do like the save the Hinata character aspect. I do love the gang aspects. I love all the stories of all the characters. Mikey's a fantastic character. Draken's a fantastic character. There's just so many fantastic characters in the show, and I do love that the show doesn't focus too much on Takemichi, but rather puts a lot of focus on the Manji gang. It puts a lot of focus on Mikey and all them, and that's the nugget of stuff that I love. I would have loved this to be a Tokyo Mikey gang series or something like that, because I think these characters are really good. And like I said, the insights into this particular culture of Japanese gangs was really fascinating to me. I come to anime for these different cultures and different stories that you just don't find in the West. And this was a prime example of that. Putting aside my issues with Takemichi, putting aside my issues with the censorship, putting aside my issues with the time elements, it had some really good stuff here. Just, I almost wanted to just do the manga. Like, it's almost one of those cases of, like, you might just want to read the manga. But even still, I did enjoy it. It was a great ride. Tokyo Revengers, that's my thoughts on the series. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of it. If you did, leave a like down below. Comment, let me know about the series if you're going to check it out. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you can. Support us on Patreon if you can. We definitely appreciate everybody does. Or hit that tip button inside the description. And we hope you all enjoyed, and y'all take care.